When Mrs. Johnson saw me at her son's engagement party, holding official papers, she assumed I was some ex-girlfriend trying to ruin his big day. She marched over, ready to throw me out. But when I calmly explained why I was there, the entire family froze. I wasn't there to stop the wedding. I was there to read his father's will. Before we dive into this jaw-dropping story about family secrets, hidden inheritance, and a mother who got the shock of her life, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. This story has more twists than a soap opera, and you won't want to miss a single detail. My name is Denise Carter, and I've been practicing law for 15 years. I've seen my share of family drama, bitter divorces, and contested wills. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened at the Johnson family engagement party last spring. This story still gives me chills, and I guarantee it'll stay with you long after you finish watching. It all started 8 months before that dramatic evening. I was working late in my downtown office when my secretary buzzed me about a walk-in client. Robert Johnson was a thin, well-dressed man in his 70s with tired eyes and the kind of measured way of speaking that told you he'd been thinking about his words for a long time. "Ms. Carter," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk, "I need to make some changes to my will, and I need someone who doesn't know my family." That was an unusual request, but not unheard of. What made it interesting was what he said next. "I specifically chose you because you're an outsider to our community, and frankly, because you're a Black woman." I raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Johnson, I'm good at my job, regardless of my race." He held up a hand. "I didn't mean it like that. I meant that when the time comes, my family will underestimate you. They'll make assumptions, and that's exactly what I need." The way he said it made me lean forward. This wasn't just about legal documents. This was about strategy. Over the next few weeks, Robert came to my office regularly. He told me about his family, his disappointments, and his growing concern about his son Michael's upcoming marriage. Robert had built a successful construction company from nothing, working 16-hour days to provide for his family. But success had come with a price. His relationship with his wife Helen had grown cold, and his son Michael had become entitled and dismissive. "They think I don't see what's happening," Robert told me during one of our meetings. "Helen treats me like I'm already dead, just waiting for the insurance money. And Michael, he brings his fiancée around, and they all act like I'm some old fool who doesn't understand the world anymore." But Robert wasn't a fool. He'd hired a private investigator and discovered some troubling things about his son's fiancée, Amanda. She had a history of targeting older, wealthy men. And this wasn't her first engagement to someone with substantial family money. The previous relationship had ended mysteriously just before the wedding, with the man's family paying her a significant sum to disappear. "I don't want to destroy my son," Robert said, his voice heavy with sadness. "But I need him to see the truth, and I need my family to understand that I'm not the helpless old man they think I am." That's when Robert outlined his plan. He would change his will, but the family wouldn't know the details until after his death. More importantly, he wanted the will read at a specific time and place, whenever Michael announced his engagement publicly. It was an unusual request, but Robert was determined. "I want you to show up at their engagement party," he said. "I want them to see a Black woman walk into their fancy celebration with legal documents. And I want them to react exactly the way I know they will, because their reaction will prove every point I'm trying to make." I initially hesitated. It felt like I was being asked to be part of a performance. But as Robert continued to share stories about his family's casual racism, their dismissive treatment of him, and their obvious gold-digging future daughter-in-law, I began to understand his strategy. This wasn't just about money. It was about forcing his family to confront their own prejudices and assumptions. 3 months later, Robert died suddenly of a heart attack. His family was devastated, but in that performative way that happens when someone dies and people realize they should have been nicer. The funeral was a grand affair, with Helen playing the grieving widow and Michael talking about how much he'd learned from his father. I attended the funeral, sitting in the back, watching the family dynamics play out, exactly as Robert had described. Helen was already talking about selling the house and moving somewhere warmer. Michael and Amanda were discussing wedding plans, clearly anticipating a large inheritance. The whole family seemed to be moving on remarkably quickly. 2 weeks after the funeral, I received a call from Helen Johnson. Michael had officially proposed to Amanda, and they were planning an engagement party for the following Saturday. It was time to execute Robert's final wish. The engagement party was held at the country club, exactly the kind of venue you'd expect from a family trying to display their wealth. I arrived right on time, wearing my best business suit and carrying a leather portfolio. The moment I walked through the doors, I could feel the shift in the room. I was one of maybe 3 black people in the entire venue, and I was clearly not dressed for a party. Conversations stopped, people stared, I could hear whispered questions about who I was and why I was there. But I walked straight toward the family table, where Helen, Michael, and Amanda were holding court. Helen saw me first. Her face went from confusion to irritation to something approaching panic. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Excuse me," she said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "I think you're in the wrong place." I kept walking. "Mrs. Johnson, I'm here to see you and your family." "Well, whatever you're selling, we're not interested," she snapped. "This is a private family celebration." Michael looked up from his conversation with Amanda, his face flushed with embarrassment. "Mom, what's going on?" Helen's voice got louder. "This woman just walked in here like she owns the place. Security should be handling this." I could see other guests turning to stare. Some were pulling out their phones. The whole scene was unfolding exactly as Robert had predicted. I remained calm, professional, and spoke clearly. "Mrs. Johnson, I'm Denise Carter, attorney for the late Robert Johnson. I'm here because your husband left specific instructions about when and where his will should be read to the family." The color drained from Helen's face. Michael stood up so quickly, he knocked over his champagne glass. Amanda grabbed his arm, whispering urgently in his ear. "That's impossible," Helen said, but her voice had lost its aggressive edge. "Robert's will was already read. The lawyer said everything goes to the family." I opened my portfolio and pulled out the official documents. "That was a preliminary will, Mrs. Johnson. Your husband created a more recent version, which I have here, along with instructions that it be read at Michael's engagement celebration." By now, the entire party had gone silent. Guests were openly staring, many still recording with their phones. The bride-to-be looked like she was going to be sick. Michael kept looking between me and his mother, clearly struggling to understand what was happening. "You're lying," Helen said, but there was desperation in her voice now. "Robert would never, he wouldn't do this to us." I looked directly at her. "Mrs. Johnson, your husband came to me 8 months ago because he said his family would react exactly the way you're reacting right now. He said you'd see a black woman with official documents and assume I was there to cause trouble, rather than listening to what I actually had to say." Helen's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Around us, guests were murmuring, some looking embarrassed by the obvious display of racism they'd just witnessed. "He said," I continued, "that you'd try to have me removed before finding out why I was really here. He said you'd make assumptions about me based on how I look, rather than treating me as a professional doing her job." I could see the realization dawning on Michael's face. His father had orchestrated this entire moment, predicting their reactions with surgical precision. "What does the will say?" Michael asked quietly. I opened the document. "Your father left very specific instructions. The bulk of his estate, including the family home, the business, and his investments, will go to Michael under one condition." Amanda squeezed Michael's arm tighter. Helen leaned forward, her face a mixture of hope and terror. "Michael must break his engagement to Amanda Peterson and remain unmarried for 2 years. If he chooses to marry Amanda, he forfeits his inheritance entirely. The money will instead go to various charities. with a special provision for organizations that fight discrimination and provide legal aid to underserved communities. The silence that followed was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop in that country club. Amanda's face went white, then red, then white again. Helen looked like she was having trouble breathing. "There's more," I continued. "Your father also left a letter explaining his decision. He discovered that Amanda Peterson was previously engaged to a man named Thomas Fletcher, a wealthy widower from Atlanta. That engagement ended abruptly when Mr. Fletcher's family paid Amanda $50,000 to disappear after discovering she was simultaneously dating 2 other men for their money." Amanda stood up so fast, her chair fell over. "That's not true." I pulled out another document. "Your father hired a private investigator, Amanda. He has photographs, bank records, and witness statements. He also discovered that you've been pressuring Michael to exclude his parents from wedding planning because you wanted to control the guest list and prevent them from inviting people who might recognize you." Michael was staring at Amanda like he'd never seen her before. "Amanda, is this true?" "Michael, baby, let me explain." "Is it true?" he repeated, his voice getting louder. Amanda's facade cracked completely. "Those relationships didn't mean anything. I love you, Michael. We can fight this will. We can get out," Helen said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. Helen Johnson, who 5 minutes earlier had been trying to have me thrown out, was now staring at Amanda with pure hatred. "Get out of my family's celebration," Helen said, her voice growing stronger. "Get out now." Amanda looked around the room, seeing no allies, no support. She grabbed her purse and practically ran toward the exit, her heels clicking frantically on the marble floor. The party guests began to murmur again, but the energy had completely shifted. Michael sank back into his chair, looking shell-shocked. Helen sat down heavily, staring at the documents in my hands. "There's one more thing," I said gently. "Your father left personal letters for both of you." I handed Helen a sealed envelope with her name written in Robert's careful handwriting. She opened it with shaking hands and read silently, tears beginning to stream down her face. Michael's letter was longer. As he read, his expression changed from confusion to understanding to something that might have been relief. When he finished, he looked up at me with new respect. "He knew," Michael said quietly. "He knew exactly what she was doing, and he knew we'd never listen to him if he just told us." Helen was crying openly now. "He says he forgives me," she whispered. "He says he knew I was unhappy, but he hoped I'd remember what we used to have together. He says he's not angry, just disappointed." I watched this family processing their grief, their shame, and their realization that Robert Johnson had been far more aware and strategic than they'd ever imagined. The man they'd dismissed as a declining old fool had orchestrated a revelation that probably saved his son from a disastrous marriage and forced his family to confront their own prejudices. "What happens now?" Michael asked. "That depends on you," I said. "Your father's will gives you a choice. You can choose love over money if you believe Amanda is worth it, or you can choose to honor your father's wisdom and inherit what he built." Michael looked around the room, at the guests who were still watching, still recording, still whispering about what they'd witnessed. "Can I ask you something, Ms. Carter?" "Of course. Do you think my father was right about Amanda?" I considered my words carefully. "I think your father loved you enough to risk looking like the villain in order to protect you. The evidence he gathered speaks for itself. But ultimately, that's a decision only you can make." Michael nodded slowly. "When do I need to decide?" "According to the will, you have 30 days to make your choice. If you choose to honor the conditions, you'll inherit everything. If you choose to marry Amanda, despite the evidence, you'll receive only what the law requires, and the rest will go to charity." Helen looked up from her letter. "Robert donated to the legal aid clinic where you volunteer, didn't he?" I nodded. "He did his research on me too, Mrs. Johnson. He wanted to make sure that if his money went to charity, it would go to causes that actually help people." The party was clearly over. Guests were leaving in small groups, whispering about what they'd witnessed. The Johnson family sat in the ruins of their celebration, processing the reality that Robert had orchestrated this entire revelation from beyond the grave. 3 weeks later, I received a call from Michael. He'd chosen to honor his father's conditions. Amanda had left town immediately after the party, and Michael had heard through mutual friends that she was already dating someone new. Another wealthy man, older, recently widowed. I keep thinking about what would have happened if Dad hadn't done this, Michael told me. I would have married her. I would have given her access to everything he worked for. And I probably would have spent years wondering why I was so unhappy. Helen came to my office a few days later to thank me personally. She looked older, more tired, but also somehow more at peace. I need to apologize, she said. The way I treated you at the party, the assumptions I made. Robert was right. I saw a black woman with official documents, and I immediately assumed you were there to cause trouble. I'm ashamed of myself. Mrs. Johnson, your husband knew exactly how you'd react. This wasn't about punishment. It was about revelation. He wanted you to see your own prejudices clearly enough to choose to change them. She nodded, tears in her eyes. He left me a letter, too. He said he hoped that seeing my reaction would help me understand how I'd been treating not just you, but other people. He said he still loved me, but he needed me to be better. 6 months later, Michael used part of his inheritance to expand his father's business, specifically focusing on providing construction jobs and training for underserved communities. Helen moved to a smaller house and began volunteering at the same legal aid clinic where I donate my time. The story of the Johnson family engagement party spread throughout the community. Some people were outraged by Robert's tactics, calling them manipulative and cruel. Others saw it as a brilliant final lesson from a man who understood his family better than they understood themselves. What struck me most was how perfectly Robert had predicted every reaction. He knew his wife would be hostile and dismissive. He knew his son would be embarrassed by the scene. He knew Amanda would crumble under scrutiny. And he knew that forcing them to confront their assumptions in such a public way would be the only thing that could actually change their behavior. I think about Robert Johnson often. He was a man who spent his final months watching his family take him for granted, dismiss his concerns, and prepare to hand his life's work over to someone who saw them only as a source of money. Instead of getting angry or bitter, he got strategic. He used his death as a teaching moment. He used his will as a mirror, forcing his family to see themselves clearly for the first time. And he used their prejudices against them, knowing that their assumptions about me would actually prove his point more effectively than any lecture ever could. The truth is, Robert Johnson got the last word, but more importantly, he got the last lesson. His family learned that the quiet man they'd been ignoring was actually paying attention to everything. They learned that their assumptions about people based on race could blind them to important truths. And they learned that sometimes the people we underestimate are the ones who end up changing our lives. Michael Johnson is now happily married to a woman he met at a charity event, someone who fell in love with his dedication to his community work, not his bank account. Helen has become one of the most effective volunteers at our legal aid clinic, specifically because she understands what it's like to make assumptions about people and be completely wrong. And me, I learned that sometimes being part of someone's final plan means becoming part of their family's redemption story. Robert Johnson didn't just leave his son an inheritance. He left his entire family a chance to become better people. Every time I think about that engagement party, I'm reminded that we never really know what's going on behind closed doors. We never know who's watching, who's listening, and who's planning to teach us lessons we desperately need to learn. Robert Johnson made sure that his final act wasn't just about money. It was about truth, justice, and the possibility that people can change when forced to confront their own reflections. Sometimes the people we underestimate end up having the last word. Robert Johnson made sure his final message was heard loud and clear. What do you think? Was he right to use his will this way? Should family inheritance come with conditions? Let me know in the comments below. If this story had you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button and subscribe for more incredible true stories that prove reality is stranger than fiction. Hit that bell icon because you definitely don't want to miss what's coming next.